People who aren't flexible enough deserve to be cut early. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, delivering the verdict as if crushing someone weaker. And in that exact moment, a name disappeared from the spreadsheet. Marcus Gray, single father, core engineer. A man just ejected from the system with a cold mouse click. The entire meeting room stayed silent. No objections, no questions. Everything looked clean, reasonable, as if a human being had just been crossed out to tidy up the books. Seconds later, the mission-critical system began to collapse. Red alerts everywhere, logs spiraling out of control, a 9-figure contract sliding toward cancellation, and the only person who truly understood the core was the very one who had just been thrown away. Wait, Marcus wasn't a weak employee. He was the one who built the core that the entire company was clinging to breathe. And the one now shaking, desperately calling for help, was Ethan. If you were Marcus, would you save a system that had treated you as disposable? This isn't a story meant to make you feel better. It's for anyone who's ever been cut because of 2 words, not flexible enough. If you want to know who really saved the company and the price of helping when you shouldn't have to, stay with us, hit subscribe now, and comment. If it were you, would you save it or walk away? Monday morning opened with a heavy feeling that did not need a name. The office lights were still on, the air conditioning still ran evenly, but every movement was slower than usual. People arrived early, sat at their desks early, and spoke more quietly. The familiar jokes disappeared. On the internal screens, emails kept appearing, the same subject line, the same dry rhythm, reminding everyone about cost review meetings scheduled throughout the week. No one asked why. Everyone understood. Marcus put his backpack down and opened his laptop. The work calendar popped up, packed tight with gray blocks. Cost review stacked on top of each other like a fence with no way out. He stared for a few seconds, then muttered softly enough for only himself to hear. More meetings. Meetings like this mean someone's gone. The sentence carried no complaint, just a conclusion drawn after many years of living through the same cycles. Marcus was a back-end engineer, working with real-time data systems, the core layer that very few people touched, unless it was necessary. 7 years at the company had made him used to solving problems in silence. When systems broke down in the middle of the night, Marcus was often the last one to leave the screen. But he was also used to something else. Things that did not show up on charts often did not exist when the company started tightening up. He stood up and walked into the hallway, intending to grab some coffee to wake himself up. Before he reached the machine, Ethan called out quietly. Ethan pulled him closer to the wall, his voice low and quick, his eyes glancing toward the end of the hallway as if afraid someone might hear. "Don't push anything right now. Everyone's under scrutiny." Marcus looked at Ethan and nodded. No need to ask more. That sentence was enough for him to understand. This week was not for personal requests and not for explanations either. Back at his desk, Marcus tried to reread the unfinished code, but his mind drifted elsewhere. His phone vibrated lightly. He glanced at the wall clock, then opened the message he had been drafting to Lily's doctor. His fingers stopped before typing further, as if weighing every word. "Can I be 20 minutes late? Don't dare ask for time off." The ellipsis appeared, then disappeared. Marcus sent the message, feeling his throat go dry. At this company, asking for time off was not simply asking for time, it was a signal of how flexible you were. The meeting started on time. The conference room was sealed, white lights shining down on the long table. The large screen displayed revenue numbers sliding down quarter by quarter, clear enough to need no explanation. The CFO stood up, no preamble, his voice steady and cold. "We don't cut emotions, we cut costs." The sentence landed, short and sharp, and the room fell silent. No one objected. No one took notes. Marcus felt an invisible pressure pressing down on his shoulders. When it came to the discussion of the real-time data project, Marcus spoke up. He presented the solution he had prepared, went straight to the bottleneck he knew best. He knew that if the core was not handled, every other patch only bought time. But after only a few sentences, Ethan cut in, polite but firm. "Let the team handle it. Marcus should focus on his own part." A few eyes glanced over, then quickly looked away. Marcus stopped and nodded. He sat down, understanding that at this moment, keeping order in the room mattered more than saving the system. The meeting ended with no clear decisions, only more meetings added to the schedule. Marcus returned to his desk, opened his email, and replied to a few technical messages out of habit. In his head, other questions began to crowd in. If a choice had to be made, who would the company keep? Who was flexible enough? Who could stay late, work nights, and take on more without asking back? He knew where he stood on that list. As the afternoon faded, Marcus left the office earlier than usual. No one asked, no one saw him off. On the way home, he thought about Lily, about the upcoming treatment schedule, about the evenings he usually came home late, but still tried to cook his child a pot of hot porridge. The small apartment opened into warm yellow light. Lily sat on the sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket, coughing in short fits. Marcus set his bag down, sat beside her, and placed his hand on Lily's back, feeling the uneven rhythm of her breathing. "Are you working nights again, Dad?" Lily asked, her voice hoarse but familiar. Marcus forced a smile, trying to keep his tone light. "Yeah, just a few days." He knew this answer had been repeated too many times, but right now, he had no other one. While Lily took her medicine, Marcus's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen and saw the email subject clearly. Workforce update. His heart beat faster, not from surprise, but from the cold precision of the timing. Marcus opened the email, read line by line, then stopped. His eyes moved over the carefully prepared sentences, polite, standard. He whispered, as if talking to himself, "No, not today." But the screen did not change. He scrolled to the end of the email. A line appeared, short and final. "Health insurance coverage ends effective immediately." Marcus stood still, phone in hand, but feeling gone from it. Behind him, Lily called out, her voice weak but clear, "Dad, where's my medicine?" Marcus turned back. The next morning, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. The apartment was so quiet that he could clearly hear the refrigerator humming softly in the kitchen. The layoff email was still open on his phone, like an object left behind after an accident. He turned off the screen, got up, and began the day by calling the health insurance hotline, a habit he had never imagined he would have to form in his life. The female voice on the other end of the line spoke evenly, exactly following the script. Marcus listened through all the automated options, then waited. When the call connected, he spoke quickly, his voice strained from trying to stay calm. "You mean, starting today, there's nothing left at all?" The line was silent for exactly 2 seconds, then replied in a mechanical tone, "Neither high nor low." "That's according to procedure, sir." The sentence ended the call faster than Marcus expected. He hung up, stared at the black screen, as if he had just been pushed out of a room he once thought was safe. Marcus opened his laptop and went to job boards. His profile was still there, full of degrees, experience, and projects. He edited his resume, removing lines he had once been proud of, adding keywords he knew the system would like. 1 hour passed, then 2. Marcus sent out 27 resumes, each click of the submit button paired with a deep breath, as if that could improve his chances. By noon, a reply email appeared. "We've moved forward with other candidates." Marcus finished reading and let out a dry laugh. "Of course," he muttered, then closed the laptop, knowing there would be many more emails like that. In the afternoon, Marcus took Lily to the hospital. The clinic was brightly lit, and the familiar smell of disinfectant was in the air. The doctor opened the file and spoke about the new treatment plan in a professional voice, steady and clear. Marcus nodded continuously, but when he heard the cost, he cut in and asked quickly, "If I pay a week late, will that be a problem?" The doctor looked at him, silent for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then he spoke slowly, each word clear. "You already know the answer." Marcus nodded, said nothing more. He had known it before. He just still hoped there might be some kind of opening. In the days that followed, Marcus started taking any job that could pay immediately. The first warehouse shift came faster than he expected. The warehouse manager handed him a pair of thick gloves, tossed onto the table like something not worth handling carefully. "There are no engineers here, only people who can do the work or not." Marcus nodded, pulled on the gloves, and did not react. Heavy boxes, narrow aisles, sweat soaking through his back. He worked to a rhythm set by others. No more code, no more systems, only strength and time. In the evening, Marcus switched to delivery work. The vehicle kept moving, The phone kept pinging with orders. In the middle of a shift, the phone vibrated, and a message from Lily appeared. "Dad, I have a bit of a fever." Marcus was lifting boxes, his hands dusty, sweat running down his neck. He replied quickly, "Drink some water first. I'll be home soon." After sending it, he stood still for a few seconds, then kept working, because every minute stopped was a minute of lost money. The new rhythm of life pulled Lily into a gap Marcus had never prepared for. In the evenings, she grew used to being home alone, turning on the lights early, locking the door carefully. Marcus came home late, tried to keep things tidy, but the apartment gradually became messy. One night, Lily spilled a bowl of porridge. The sound of the bowl hitting the floor was sharp and dry. Marcus was exhausted. The words came out before he could think. "Do you know how tired I am?" Lily froze, eyes wide. Marcus looked at her, his heart tightening. He stopped, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. He bent down to wipe the floor, his hands shaking, not sure if from fatigue or from shame. Numbers began to appear more densely on the kitchen table. Marcus opened the hospital bill envelope. White paper, black print, painfully clear. The number felt like a slap to his face. Marcus took a pen, wrote on a small piece of paper, and placed it next to the envelope. "Medicine money is greater than food money." The greater than sign was crooked, the pen strokes unsteady. He stared at that line for a long time, as if relearning a new kind of math, one where the result was always lacking. Night shifts followed day shifts. Marcus slept in fragments, woke up to order alerts. Lily grew used to eating dinner early, used to texting her dad instead of calling. Marcus grew used to the constant exhaustion, a kind of tiredness that did not disappear after sleep. He started counting money by day, then by hour. One missed shift meant a gap that could not be filled. That night, Marcus came home late. Lily was already asleep on the sofa, the blanket slipping halfway down her body. He carried her to the bedroom and gently laid her on the bed. On the kitchen table, the hospital bill envelope was still there, next to the piece of paper he had left unfinished. The phone vibrated, the screen lighting up the dark kitchen. A message from the hospital appeared, brief, without preamble. "If payment is not made before 9 a.m., tomorrow, the treatment schedule will be cancelled." Marcus looked at the wall clock. The hour hand and minute hand met at the exact time he did not want to see. 1:12 a.m. The morning at Marcus's former company office began with harsh sounds coming from the war room. Rapid keyboard clacking, chairs scraping hard against the floor, system alerts ringing non-stop like alarm sirens. The large screen hanging in the center of the room had turned almost entirely red, warnings flashing one after another, not giving anyone time to finish reading one line before having to look at the next. One engineer jumped to his feet, his voice breaking under the strain. It auto-crashed again, third time in an hour. No one answered right away. A few people leaned close to their screens. Others flipped through logs, eyes red from lack of sleep. The room was full, but the air felt thick, as if every space had been filled with pressure. Ethan stood at the head of the table, both hands pressed onto the wood surface, trying to keep his voice steady. "Focus on fixing symptoms first. Don't dig deep." He spoke quickly, as if speed could replace a solution. A dev, at the far end of the table, looked up, his tone sharp. "The symptom is the whole system bleeding." The sentence made a few people turn to look at Ethan, waiting for his reaction. Ethan did not respond right away. He turned to the screen, pointed at a load graph, and shifted to another topic, trying to pull the meeting back into a direction he could control. The real-time data project was the last thing keeping the company standing in front of investors. A major contract was waiting to be signed, every clause dependent on whether the system could handle real load or not. On paper, Ethan was the architecture lead. On the presentation slides, his name appeared in the central position, but in reality, the most complex core of the system had been built years earlier, when Marcus was still here, and almost no one had dared to touch it since. The CTO walked into the room without warning. The room fell silent. He scanned the red-filled screens, then turned to Ethan, his voice cold and short. "Who owns the core architecture?" Ethan answered immediately, almost by reflex. "I do," but his eyes slid away, avoiding direct eye contact, like someone who had just swallowed a stone. The CTO said nothing more, only gave a slight nod, then sat down to wait. A young engineer flipped back through the logs, his eyes widening when he saw something odd. He hesitated, then said what was clearly in front of him. "This module No one on the team wrote it. It has an old signature. The room fell silent for a beat. Some people looked back down at their screens, and others glanced toward Ethan. Ethan moved quickly, placed a hand on the young engineer's shoulder, and pulled him out into the hallway. His voice dropped, sharp and urgent. "Don't talk about signatures in front of anyone. Understand?" It was not advice. It sounded like an order. The young engineer nodded, swallowed hard, and returned to his desk, avoiding the eyes of the others. Inside the room, the meeting continued as if nothing had happened. Safe words were used more often, minor instability, localized issues, temporary adjustments. Ethan coordinated, assigned tasks, and ordered patches on the most visible spot. He knew exactly what he was doing. Each patch like that was a bandage placed over a wound bleeding on the inside. But he needed time, and time was the one thing he did not have. At the end of the day, Ethan sat alone in his office. The laptop screen showed a report addressed to investors. He edited each sentence, each phrase. Systemic failure was replaced with minor instability. Bad numbers were pushed into the appendix. He read through it once more, breathing fast, then told himself, just get through this week. The words echoed in the empty room, heard by no one but himself. The desk phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the display. Ethan picked up, adjusted his voice. "Hi, Claire." The CEO's voice on the other end carried no preamble. "Ethan, I want the truth, not slides." Ethan swallowed, glanced at the open log screen. "Yes, I'm controlling it," he replied, even knowing how thin that sentence was. The call ended quickly, leaving Ethan with a hollow feeling spreading through his chest. Night fell, and the office thinned out. The war room lights were still on. Ethan returned, sat in front of the computer, this time not opening dashboards, but opening the old source repository. He scrolled down, past commits from years ago, familiar lines of code he had never fully understood. Then he saw that name, appearing again and again in the most sensitive sections. Marcus Gray. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a few seconds. He remembered the cost-cutting meeting, remembered how Marcus had sat quietly when he was pushed aside. When the list was submitted, Ethan had not objected. Keeping Marcus meant admitting he did not control the system core. In Ethan's mind at the time, it had been a necessary decision to protect the team, to protect the project, to protect himself. But now, as every patch failed, as the system collapsed right in front of investors, the old justifications began to crumble. Ethan looked back at the logs and clearly saw code that only its builder could truly understand. He knew that if the core was not touched, this project would die, and if the project died, so would he. Ethan picked up his phone and opened his contacts. Marcus's name was still there, like a relic that had not been erased. His finger trembled slightly as he pressed call. The ringing stretched on. No one answered. Ethan bit his lip and called again. This time, his voice was lower, the familiar confidence gone. "Marcus, pick up, please," he whispered, as if speaking to a closed door. The call stayed silent. Ethan watched the phone screen go dark, then set it down on the desk. In the empty room, only the hum of fans and the blinking green lights from the server remained. Ethan sat there, staring at Marcus's name in the old repo, finally understanding something he had tried to avoid from the start. Some people, once removed from the system, are still the only thing keeping that system alive. The evening delivery shift started later than usual. Marcus stood in the warehouse, the back of his shirt soaked with sweat, the smell of machine oil and paper dust clinging to his hands. Boxes were pushed out non-stop, the pace rushed, and no one talked more than necessary. Here, time was measured by how many packages passed through your hands. Every slowed minute had a price. Marcus adjusted to this rhythm after only a few days, a forced familiarity where the body adapted before the mind could react. He bent down to lift a large box onto the conveyor when the phone in his pocket vibrated. Marcus paused for half a beat, pulled the phone out, and glanced at the screen. Ethan's name appeared. A faint smile crossed his lips. "So now you remember I exist?" Marcus said quietly, not sure if he was speaking to the name on the screen or to himself. He stood still for a few seconds, then answered, lifting the phone to his ear while the machines continued to roar behind him. Ethan did not greet him. His voice came fast, as if racing something invisible. "I don't have time to go in circles. The project is about to collapse. If it goes down, hundreds of people are out." Marcus listened, eyes fixed on the metal wall in front of him. He did not answer right away. The numbers Ethan mentioned passed through his head, lighter than a single name now surfacing in his mind. "And what about me?" Marcus asked, his voice even but dry. "I'm already out. What about Lily?" On the other end, Ethan went silent. The silence lasted just long enough for Marcus to understand that this question was not part of the call's script. Ethan cleared his throat and continued, his voice lower. "Marcus, that situation, The sentence stopped halfway, then shifted direction, like a habit practiced many times. Marcus looked down at his hands, oil blackened under his nails, small cuts, not yet healed. He spoke slowly, as if saying it out loud to hear it clearly himself. "You're calling me like this? No contract, no insurance, nothing." The sentence fell out, not an accusation, but a reality check. Marcus wanted to hear how Ethan would respond to that truth. Ethan lowered his voice, completely different from the earlier urgency. "I'll make it right, I promise." The two words came out quickly, like a reflex. Marcus let out a short laugh, carrying no amusement at all. "I don't eat promises," he replied, his voice cold. In the warehouse, a supervisor called out Marcus's name, telling him to get back to work. Marcus raised a hand to signal he heard, but stayed where he was. In his head, another sound rose, clearer than the machines around him. "Dad, where's my medicine?" Lily's voice, weak and familiar. Marcus closed his eyes, standing still for a few seconds. Fragmented images surfaced. The pot with a bent handle on the stove, the scrap of paper listing costs, the hospital message sent past midnight. All of it layered together, out of order, but pointing to the same place. Marcus opened his eyes and looked back at the warehouse. Other men were lifting boxes, sweat running down their faces, eyes focused on the work. He thought of other kitchens, other children, other hospital envelopes waiting to be opened. He knew that if that project collapsed, these people would fall into the same spiral. The thought did not make him noble. It only made the choice clearer. Marcus brought the phone closer. His voice changed, concise and firm. "I'll fix it." Ethan exhaled hard on the other end, like someone who had been holding his breath too long. Marcus continued, not letting Ethan interrupt. "One night, no meetings, no teamwork. When it's done, I disappear." The conditions were stated like lines of code, precise, no excess. On the other end, Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then replied quickly, "Okay, I agree." Marcus looked up at the warehouse ceiling, white lights glaring down. He said one last sentence, his voice low but sharp. "Remember this, I'm not saving you. I'm saving the people who would get crushed as I did." With that, Marcus ended the call, not waiting for a response. The phone returned to a dark screen. He slipped it into his pocket, turned back to the conveyor, and kept lifting boxes as if nothing had happened. The shift ended late. Marcus left the warehouse when the sky was fully dark. He drove home, his mind empty, not thinking about the project, not thinking about Ethan. Those would come later. For now, he only thought about Lily sleeping, about whether he was still clear-headed enough to sit in front of a screen. He opened the apartment door as quietly as possible, set his bag down, and looked at his daughter curled up on the bed, her breathing steadier than during the day. Marcus did not turn on the main light. He washed his hands for a long time under running water, watching the oil and dust rinse away, revealing small cuts. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened his old laptop, the machine that had followed him through many emergency nights before. The screen lit up, reflecting a tired but focused face. He opened the remote source repository and entered access credentials he had never imagined using this way again. Familiar lines of code appeared. Marcus scrolled quickly, his eyes automatically drawn to sensitive areas he did not read from the beginning. He remembered the structure, remembered the logic he had built into it. The team's recent patches were obvious, overlapping, and trying to cover a deeper problem. Marcus stopped at one module, where he had known the issue lay from the start. He typed a few notes for himself, then began editing. Time moved faster than he expected. The clock on the screen jumped past midnight. Marcus did not notice. He only paused when a test ran through without crashing. He continued, digging deeper, fixing section by section, removing patches he knew would backfire. Occasionally, messages from Ethan appeared. "Is it okay?" Marcus did not reply. He did not need more pressure, and he did not need confirmation. Near dawn, the system ran the full test suite again. Marcus watched the screen and waited. Lines of green text appeared one after another. No warnings, no crashes. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly, exhaustion flooding in all at once. He saved the changes, pushed the code, wrote a brief note, unsigned, like an old habit. The phone vibrated. A message from Ethan appeared. It passed. "Thank you." Marcus looked at the screen, then placed the phone face down. He closed the laptop, stood up, and walked into Lily's room. She slept peacefully, her forehead cooler. Marcus pulled the blanket up, sat on the edge of the bed for a few seconds, and looked at her. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. Marcus returned to the kitchen and looked at the wall clock. A new day was about to begin, like any other. He knew that from this moment, some things had been saved, and some things would never come back. He stood there, in the quiet kitchen, with a choice just made, one that would stay with him longer than any line of code. The kitchen was silent as Marcus opened the laptop. The old machine let out a small but sharp fan noise, the body heating up after only a few minutes of booting. Light from the screen fell onto his hollowed face, exposing exhaustion that had not yet been washed away after the delivery shift. On the table, a cup of coffee had gone cold long ago, a thin ring of foam clinging to the rim. Marcus did not touch it. He pulled the chair closer, leaned toward the screen, as if reducing the distance by a few centimeters might help him see more clearly what was waiting ahead. The source repository opened. Familiar folders appeared, a structure Marcus had once built through long nights in the past, when the company was still growing and no one talked about cuts. He scrolled quickly, skipped over newly added patches, his eyes drawn to the exact place. Instinct pulled him toward. When he stopped, Marcus muttered softly, his voice low and rough. "Right here. It's killing itself." He was not surprised. The bug lived there, like a self-destruct mechanism triggered when load crossed a threshold, something only the person who designed it from the start could anticipate. Marcus began typing. Logs streamed densely across the screen, line after line, like a waterfall. He adjusted parameters, changed how the system reacted under pressure. Each test run made his heart beat one notch faster. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but his hands did not stop. "Don't crash. Don't crash now," Marcus whispered, as if bargaining with the system he had once created. In the living room, the wall clock ticked steadily, marking minutes passing that he could not reclaim. Near 3 in the morning, Marcus paused for a beat. An abnormal log entry appeared, then vanished. He frowned and reviewed every line of code he had just changed. Sweat ran down his spine. Even though the kitchen was cold, he adjusted one more spot, very small, just enough to change how the system distributed load at peak moments. Then, he ran the full test suite. The screen stayed still for a few seconds longer than usual. Marcus held his breath. 3:40 a.m. appeared in the corner of the screen. The system did not crash. Metrics gradually stabilized, the graph flattening after a brief wobble. Marcus leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly, like someone surfacing after holding his breath too long. "Done," he said, his voice lighter than he expected. His body sagged as fatigue hit all at once, but his mind remained strangely clear. Marcus saved the changes and pushed the code to the shared repository. He wrote a short note, just enough technical description, no name, no trace. An old habit from when he was still here, when who did the work mattered less than whether the system ran. The phone vibrated on the table. A message from Ethan appeared. It passed. "Thank you." Marcus looked at the words for a few seconds, then typed back exactly 2 words. "Don't mention it." He placed the phone face down, as if afraid any further notification might pull him back into the reality on the other side of the screen. Marcus closed the laptop, stood up, and walked into Lily's room. She slept on her side, breathing more evenly than the night before. He pulled the blanket up and gently smoothed her tangled hair. Lily stirred slightly, then asked in her sleep, her voice hazy, "Dad, are you asleep yet?" Marcus bent down and whispered, "Not yet, but you sleep." His voice was rough like sandpaper, his throat burning from lack of water and lack of sleep. Lily fell quiet again. Marcus sat for a few more seconds, then stood and went back to the kitchen. Morning began to break. Pale light slipped through the window, covering the kitchen in a cold gray tone. Marcus splashed water on his face, drank a sip, then sat down and stared blankly at the wall in front of him. He did not think about the project anymore. What needed to be done was done. The rest did not belong to him. The morning passed slowly. Marcus opened his phone and saw the hospital notification still sitting there, unresolved. He opened the banking app and looked at the balance. Almost empty. A number so low, it required no further calculation. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. Saved the company, still couldn't save my own house. The sentence slipped out, aimed at no one. It simply sat there in the kitchen, unanswered. On the other side of the city, the morning meeting began on time. Ethan stood in front of the screen, slides prepared. His face looked brighter than the night before, his voice steady and confident. Thanks to the right architectural direction, the team resolved it thoroughly. The sentence echoed in the meeting room, recorded, and met with nods of agreement. Marcus watched the replay through an internal link, sent automatically. His lip twitched slightly when he heard that line. He did not turn it off. He watched until the end, as if needing to confirm something he had already known. Internal emails began spreading quickly. The subject line appeared on Marcus's phone while he was cooking porridge for Lily. "Congrats, team, for saving the deal." Bright text, accompanied by congratulatory icons. Marcus looked at the screen, then at the hospital bill envelope still lying on the kitchen table. The two sat side by side, unrelated, unable to touch, like parallel worlds, with no intersection. Lily sat at the table, eating small spoonfuls of porridge. Marcus sat across from her, forcing his eyes to stay open. She looked up at him and asked softly, "Are you working today, Dad?" Marcus nodded and answered briefly, "Yeah." He did not explain further. Lily kept eating and did not ask again. The kitchen stayed quiet, broken only by the sound of spoon against bowl and email notifications continuing to arrive on Marcus's phone. At noon, Marcus received another message from the hospital, identical to the one from the night before. The deadline was the same. He checked the clock and calculated the remaining hours. One more delivery shift, one small amount of money, still not enough. Marcus set the phone down and stood up to put on his jacket. He bent down and spoke to Lily, his voice low. "Dad's heading out for a bit." Lily nodded, used to it. Marcus left the apartment and locked the door carefully. The building hallway was empty, fluorescent lights flickering softly. He stood there for a few seconds, leaning against the wall, eyes closed. In his mind appeared the image of stable logs, running at dawn. Then the image of the number in his banking app. The two overlapped, but did not merge. Marcus opened his eyes and walked on. As the afternoon fell, congratulatory emails continued to arrive. Familiar names were mentioned, and thanks were sent. Marcus's name was not there. There was no trace that he had spent the night keeping that system alive. Marcus skimmed one email, then deleted it. He was not angry. That feeling had passed earlier. What remained was a gap difficult to name. That evening, Marcus came home late. Lily was asleep on the sofa, the blanket slipping to one side. He carried her into the bedroom and gently laid her on the bed. On the kitchen table, the hospital bill envelope was still there, next to the closed laptop. Marcus stood looking at it for a long time. He knew that the night before, he had made a choice, and that choice had saved something very large, while leaving behind something very small but deep, right here, in this kitchen. Marcus sat down in the chair and placed both hands on the tabletop. The phone vibrated once more. A new email. Still congratulations, still familiar names. He did not open it. The screen lit up for a few seconds, then went dark. The kitchen returned to silence, with only Lily's steady breathing from the next room and the unopened envelope still waiting. The contract was signed amid collective relief. Handshakes followed the proper ritual, and congratulatory emails were sent out on schedule. The new revenue figure appeared on the central dashboard, pulling the graph upward just enough to soothe the tension of the past few weeks. But for Claire Monroe, that sense of relief did not last long. She was used to the unease that followed major wins, a habit formed from repeatedly seeing the other side of the numbers. The next morning, Claire asked the finance and engineering teams to resend the full post-mortem reports for the project. Not because she doubted the success, but because the scale of the contract required leadership to do so. Mission-critical projects always leave traces. Claire wanted to know where those traces were. She sat alone in her office, the large screen opening layer after layer of data. Claire read slowly, without skimming. She was used to finding very small deviations, the kind most people ignored because they did not affect the conclusion. When she reached the technical committee table, her eyes stopped on a short line. The account name appeared clearly, not obscured, not truncated. Marcus Gray. Claire frowned. She looked again, making sure she had not misread it. That name did not appear on the current employee list. She murmured, quiet enough that the room could not hear. "Who is this?" The question did not carry suspicion, but felt more like a piece that did not fit the picture in front of her. She pressed the internal call button. A moment later, an HR representative entered, carrying a tablet. Claire pointed at the screen, without preamble. HR leaned in, scanned the file, then answered in the familiar tone of someone who had read too many similar decisions. "Former employee, laid off in the previous round. Note, not flexible." Claire looked up, her gaze settling on the face across from her. Not flexible, yet saved the contract? The question hung in the air, not requiring an immediate answer. HR paused for a beat, then added a few procedural details. The layoff date, the general rationale, and the decision was approved according to process. Claire listened, but her attention had already moved away from the words. She turned back to the screen and drilled deeper into the technical logs. The timestamps were clear, minute by minute, second by second. The critical fix aligned exactly with the night before the contract signing. Claire looked at that number, then spoke slowly, as if reading out an uncomfortable truth. "That night? Who was sitting here?" Without waiting for an answer, Claire called Ethan. The call connected quickly. Ethan's voice came through, trying to sound normal. Claire did not greet him. "Explain this name." She said it just enough to avoid turning it into an accusation, but sharp enough that it could not be deflected. On the other end, Ethan gave an awkward laugh. "Oh, just old code. The team cleaned it up." Claire cut in, her voice low but firm. "Don't lie to me." The air in the room seemed to cool. Ethan went silent for a beat longer than necessary. Claire did not press. She let the silence do its work. She opened another log window, shared the screen, and pointed to the timestamp. This fix happened at 3:40 a.m., the night before the contract was signed. "Say it again." Ethan exhaled, his voice losing its usual confidence. Marcus took a look at it. He said, choosing his words carefully. Claire did not respond immediately. She gave a small nod, like someone confirming what she had already suspected. The call ended quickly. Claire leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. In her mind, layers of information began stacking together. A mission-critical project, a major contract, a person cut for not being flexible, and a line of code that kept everything standing. The contradiction was clear enough to be unsettling. The company had survived because of someone they had deliberately removed from the system. An assistant stepped in, carefully reading Claire's expression before speaking. "We could have HR reach out." Claire shook her head without hesitation. "No, HR only knows forms. I need the truth." The sentence carried no contempt, only a cold conclusion. Claire knew HR would follow procedure, and that was exactly the problem. She asked for the layoff list from the previous round. The thick folder was placed on the table. Claire opened it and turned the pages slowly. Names passed in front of her eyes, each paired with a short reason: optimization, performance, cost. When her hand stopped, her fingertip tapped lightly on a line of text: single parent. Claire read it again, then let the words fall out, her voice low, almost like a curse on herself. "We cut someone because they have a child." The room was silent. The assistant stood still, not daring to speak. Claire closed the folder and stood up. She did not return to the makeup table, did not call for a company car, and did not ask anyone to come along. Claire picked up her own car keys, put on her coat, and said briefly, "Send me the address." The assistant looked up, slightly startled. "Whose?" Claire answered immediately. "Marcus Gray." The car pulled out of the underground garage as the sky began to turn gray. Claire drove slowly, without turning on the music. She was used to trips with schedules and escorts. This one was different. The address appeared on the navigation screen, not far from the office, but in an area she rarely visited. The streets grew narrower, streetlights more sparse. Claire slowed down, looking around, taking in each detail. She stopped in front of an old apartment building. The facade was faded, paint peeling in patches. A few windows were lit, most were dark. Claire sat still in the car for a few seconds, her hands resting on the steering wheel. She looked up at the floors, trying to imagine life behind those windows. No logos, no slides, no numbers. Only small rooms holding decision spreadsheets would never be fully captured. Claire opened the car door and stepped out. Cold wind cut across, carrying the smell of damp air and exhaust. She pulled her coat closer and looked up at a dark window. Her gaze lingered there longer than on the others. Claire whispered, just loud enough for herself to hear, "If I step inside and see what I think, then this company owes a debt it can never repay." The apartment hallway was narrower and darker than Claire had expected. The old ceiling lights cast a dull yellow glow, not enough to push away the damp chill clinging to the walls. The smell of mold mixed with cold food hung in the air. Claire stood in front of the door, looking at the small apartment number printed crookedly on the metal frame. She checked the address in her mind again, then took a short breath. This was not a place she was used to entering. No reception desk, no security. No one is opening the door for her. Claire knocked lightly twice. The sound landed dry, then disappeared into silence. She waited, listening. From inside came the faint sound of footsteps, slow and dragging. The door opened a crack, revealing a strip of darkness behind it. A small face appeared, half hidden by the door. "Who are you looking for?" Lily asked. Her voice was hoarse, broken, as if she had to gather breath to finish the sentence. Claire froze for a beat. Her eyes settled on the face in front of her. Messy hair, large but tired eyes, cheeks flushed an unusual red. She bent slightly, bringing her gaze level. "Where's your dad?" Claire asked, her voice slow and gentle, as if anything louder might startle the child. Lily opened the door a little wider, revealing her thin body in an oversized shirt. "My dad works the night shift. I'm used to it." She said it naturally, like stating the most ordinary thing. No sadness, just familiar information. But the words fell into the space like a thin blade, quietly cutting through the thoughts Claire had carried from the office. Claire looked more closely at Lily. The girl did not stand very steadily, one hand gripping the doorframe. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. Lily nodded, then shook her head, as if unsure which answer was correct. "I have a bit of a fever," she said, her voice softer. Claire raised her hand and gently placed it on Lily's forehead. The heat transferred straight into her palm, clear and undeniable. "That's too hot," Claire said before thinking. Lily looked up, curious. "Are you a doctor?" she asked, her eyes lighting up slightly with fragile hope. "No," Claire replied. The answer was short, with no explanation. She looked into the apartment through the gap in the door. Weak yellow light fell on an old kitchen table. Papers were spread across it, folded at corners, edges curled. Claire recognized them immediately as hospital bills. She did not step inside yet. She stood there, looking long enough to understand that those numbers had not appeared overnight. "My dad said he'd be home soon," Lily added, as if to fill the silence. Claire looked back at her. "May I come in for a moment?" Claire asked, her tone neither asking permission nor giving an order. Lily thought for a few seconds, then nodded. "Yes." Claire stepped into the apartment. She pulled the door closed behind her, leaving it shut but unlocked. The space was small and low-ceilinged, the paint on the walls aged and yellowing. The apartment was not messy from neglect, but from a lack of strength to keep everything in order. Everything had a place, but those places had not been adjusted in a long time. Claire set her bag on a chair and took off her coat. Lily stood nearby, her body trembling slightly. "Sit here," Claire said, pointing to the chair by the table. Lily did as told, her feet not reaching the floor, hands resting on her lap, clenched. Claire moved into the kitchen. She opened the upper cabinet, then the lower one. There was not much inside. A small bag of rice, a few packets of instant porridge, and a box of salt, more than half used. On the stove sat an old pot, its handle bent to one side, the bottom darkened from long use. Claire looked at the pot for a few seconds. In her mind, images of late dinners, rushed cooking, and long nights surfaced on their own. She said quietly, very softly, "Okay." Claire rinsed the rice and turned on the stove. Water ran. The sound of the flame clicking on was clear in the quiet kitchen. She moved slowly, not from lack of skill, but from weighing each motion. Lily watched from the table, her eyes following closely. "Aren't you afraid of getting dirty?" the girl asked when she saw Claire pick up a few grains of rice from the counter with her bare hand. Claire answered. She stirred the pot gently, steam rising and briefly fogging her glasses. Claire removed them, set them aside, and kept stirring. The light fell on her face. No trace of the cold composure seen in meetings. Only quiet focus remained. The porridge cooked quickly. Claire scooped it into a bowl, let it cool slightly, then set it in front of Lily. "Eat slowly," she said. Lily took the spoon and ate in small bites. Each time she swallowed, she looked up at Claire, as if to make sure the person in front of her was still there. As the bowl emptied, Lily's eyes grew heavy. Claire stood and carried Lily into the bedroom. The room was small, just enough space for a single bed, a low cabinet, and a few old toys. Claire lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chest. The girl shifted slightly, then became still. Claire sat beside the bed and placed her hand on Lily's forehead again. The heat was still there, but her breathing had evened out. "Is my dad coming home soon?" Lily asked, half asleep. Claire looked at her and answered softly, "Soon." Lily nodded, her eyes closing. Claire sat by the bed, not touching her phone. The screen vibrated lightly in her pocket a few times, then stopped. She looked around the room. On the wall hung a child's drawing, a grown figure, a child, standing side by side, hands touching, no detailed faces, just shapes. Claire stared at the drawing for a long time, as if trying to understand something she had never needed to understand before. She stood and gently closed the bedroom door. Back in the living area, Claire looked again at the kitchen table. The bills were still there. She did not pick them up or read them. She stacked them more neatly and moved them aside. She washed the pot she had used and placed it back on the stove. Water ran, metal touching metal with a soft sound. The apartment was quiet. Claire leaned against the kitchen counter and breathed slowly. It was the first time in a long while she had been in a space with no clear objective, no decision that needed to be made immediately, only the tasks in front of her. In the hallway outside, footsteps sounded. Then the sound of keys brushing metal, sliding into the lock, the familiar noise of someone returning from a late shift. Claire turned her head, a dish towel still in her hand. She stood still in the small apartment, eyes fixed on the door, like someone who had crossed a boundary without yet knowing how to step back. Marcus reached the apartment complex when it was fully dark. The hallway lights cast weak patches of light, stretching his shadow across the old tiled floor. His body was worn out after a delivery shift that had run longer than expected. The shoulders of his jacket still carried the smell of engine oil, and sweat dried into stiff marks. He climbed the stairs slowly, his mind empty, thinking only of opening the door, seeing Lily sleeping peacefully, then sitting down for a few minutes before the day finally ended. The key slid into the lock, and the door opened. The kitchen light was brighter than usual. Marcus froze right at the threshold. The first sound he heard was not the TV or Lily's light coughing from the bedroom, but the steady sound of running water, the sound of metal touching the sink. Marcus took another step, his heart beating faster. In the kitchen, a woman stood with her back to the door, a light-colored shirt, sleeves neatly rolled up, hair tied low. Her hands were holding his familiar pot, turning it gently under the running water. Marcus stood still for a few seconds, as if his brain needed extra time to confirm what his eyes were seeing. His voice went dry when he spoke. "Who are you?" The woman did not turn around immediately. She rinsed the pot one more time, then spoke, her voice calm. "I'm Claire." Marcus recognized the name almost instantly, even before fully seeing her face. "CEO Claire Monroe?" he asked, his voice rougher than he expected. Claire nodded very slightly, still not turning around, her hands placing the pot into the sink. In that moment, Marcus felt his world slip out of alignment by a beat. The CEO of his former company, the person who signed the decision that laid him off, the person he had seen on big screens, in all-hands meetings, and through emails, with a cold, precise tone. Now, standing in his narrow kitchen, holding the pot he used every night. "What are you doing in my house?" Marcus asked, his voice low but tense. Every muscle in his body tightened, ready for a situation he had not yet named. Claire answered slowly, each word landing clearly. "I'm cooking porridge for your daughter." Marcus followed her gaze. The bent-handled pot sat on the stove, the water still hot. It was the pot he had bought a long time ago, cheap, its handle bent after one hard impact. He had thought about replacing it, then decided not to. It still worked. It carried the memory of nights he came home late, quietly cooking porridge for Lily in silence. He stammered, his voice breaking. "That? I cook with it every night?" Claire set the pot down on the stove and turned to face him. "I know. she said, "because it's worn down on one side." The sentence was not loud. It carried no pity. It was simply an observation. But it hit Marcus harder than any apology he had ever imagined. He looked at the pot. Indeed, one side of the bottom was more worn than the other, a sign of always being placed in the same spot, at the same angle, over and over again through time. Marcus swallowed hard. He tried to keep his voice steady. "Why did you come here?" He paused for a beat, then asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "Did you come to fire me again?" Claire shook her head. Not hurried, not evasive. "No," she said. "I came to see what we left behind." Marcus did not answer. He looked around the kitchen, where everything suddenly felt strange with her presence. The small table, the old chairs, the hospital bill envelope was neatly stacked in the corner. Lily's half-drunk glass of water. Nothing in this room belonged to Claire's world, and because of that, her presence here felt heavy. From the bedroom, Lily coughed softly. Marcus flinched and turned to step forward, but Claire spoke first. "She's asleep," she said. "The fever's still there, but the porridge helped her feel better." Marcus stood there, his arms hanging at his sides. The defensive reactions inside him slowly withdrew, replaced by a raw feeling he was not used to facing. This was not a conversation in an office, not a meeting room, no slides, no protective language. Claire looked at Marcus, for the first time, without the distance of leader and employee. "I reviewed the layoff decision," she said. "I reviewed the logs. I saw your name where it shouldn't have been." She paused for a beat, "and I wanted to see what it looked like." Marcus let out a dry laugh, short and brittle. "You see it now," he said, his voice low. "This is it. Is then?" No one spoke for several seconds. Water dripped from the kitchen faucet. Cars passed somewhere far outside. Marcus looked down at the floor. His eyes burned, but he held it back. He was used to not showing this, used to standing straight through everything. Then he realized that what he could not bear was not Claire's presence, but the way she stood there, looking directly at the life he had tried to hide from every spreadsheet, not asking, not judging, not pitying, just looking. Marcus lowered his head. Tears fell onto the kitchen floor, soundless, one drop, then another. His shoulders trembled slightly. He was not crying from anger, not from injustice. He was crying because for the first time, someone had stepped past numbers, past criteria, past the word flexible. To see him here, in this kitchen, with a bent-handled pot and a child with a fever. Claire did not step closer. She stayed where she was, letting the moment exist on its own terms. No hand on his shoulder, no comforting words, no attempt to soften what had just been opened. Marcus stood there for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red, but his voice steadier. "You should go," he said. "Not as an order, just a necessary boundary." Claire nodded. "I understand." She picked up her coat and bag. Before leaving, she paused for a second and turned back. "Thank you for opening the door," she said. The door closed. The kitchen returned to silence. Marcus stood alone, looking at the pot on the stove. Steam still rose faintly. He reached out and touched the handle, feeling its familiar bend. In the bedroom, Lily shifted. Marcus turned and walked toward her. That night, some things had been seen. The post-mortem meeting was scheduled earlier than expected. No broad announcement, no mass email, just a direct invite sent to those involved. The large conference room on the top floor was lit up very early. The atmosphere was nothing like the celebration meetings before. No coffee, no polite laughter. People arrived on time, sat in their familiar seats, but avoided each other's eyes more than usual. Claire walked in last. She did not carry a thick stack of documents, only a slim tablet. She did not speak right away. Claire stood beside the large screen, scanning the room, as if counting each face. When she began to speak, her voice was not raised, not heavy, but clear enough that no one could drift. "We're going to walk through the entire project timeline again," Claire said. "Not to assign vague responsibility, but to understand exactly what happened." The screen lit up. Lines of logs appeared, white on dark, dense, and dry. Claire did not summarize, did not interpret. She let the data speak. She tapped the screen, zoomed into a section, then stopped at a specific timestamp. This fix was written at 3:12 a.m. Claire turned to the room. "Who did it?" Ethan answered almost immediately, with the familiar tone of someone who had answered this question many times in different ways. "On-call rotation." The response was smooth, unbroken. A few people nodded out of reflex. Claire did not react. She simply touched the screen again and dragged it to the next column. "Then why is there only one account?" Claire asked. Her voice did not change, but the question made the room still. No one answered right away. A few eyes dropped to the table. Ethan cleared his throat, but before he could speak, someone at the far end of the table spoke up. The voice trembled slightly. That's Marcus's account. It was deactivated. The sentence landed, then sank into thick silence. No one turned to look at the speaker. Everyone looked toward Ethan. Claire turned to him. No need to raise her voice. You called someone who had already been laid off to come back and fix it, correct? The question was posed as a final confirmation, with no room left for interpretation. Ethan gave a strained smile. The smile appeared out of habit, then faded quickly. I was just protecting the team, he said, choosing familiar words, the same ones that had carried him through difficult moments before. Claire looked directly at Ethan. Her gaze was not angry, not personally disappointed. It was cold and clear. No, Claire said, you were protecting your seat. The sentence was not loud, but it was enough to cut off every path of retreat. The room was completely still. No paper rustling, no coughs. Ethan looked down at the table, hands close together, fingers interlaced. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, lower, slower. If I hadn't done that, everyone would have lost their jobs. He said it without looking at anyone. It sounded like a justification held too long. Claire did not answer immediately. She turned back to the screen and pulled the timeline farther out, letting the entire chain of events appear. No, she said, more firmly this time. Without Marcus, the contract would have died. No one argued. No one interrupted. The data sat there, without emotion, without bias, timestamps, lines of code, an account marked deactivated, active for a single night. Everything aligned into a straight line, clear enough to need no further explanation. Claire turned off the screen. She did not issue a decision right away. No formal disciplinary statement, no verdict. She simply looked around the room one more time. The meeting is adjourned, Claire said. We'll continue this. People stood, gathered their things, and left the room in silence. Ethan was the last to stand. He slowly packed his laptop, then walked out, no one watching. The conference room door closed behind him, leaving the room empty and the screen dark. Claire stayed for a few more minutes. She sat in Ethan's chair and reopened the logs, scrolling through them again. Not because she still doubted, but because she needed to face the full weight of the consequences of decisions once signed with her own pen. Outside, the hallway lights were still on. The company's rhythm continued as usual. Other projects kept running. Other emails kept being sent. But somewhere in the system, a crack had been exposed, one that could not be covered by slides or words. Claire stood and left the meeting room. She did not take the tablet with her. She did not call her assistant. She walked straight back to her office, closed the door, and stood still for a long moment in front of her desk. In her mind, the name Marcus Gray appeared not as a headcount entry, but as a question without a complete answer. Elsewhere in the city, Marcus was sitting in the small kitchen. On the table was the old laptop, shut down, next to the hospital bill envelope, still unopened. Lily slept in the next room, her breathing steady. Marcus knew nothing about the meeting that had just happened. He received no email. No one called him to confirm anything. Marcus's phone vibrated lightly on the table. The screen lit up, showing an unfamiliar number. He looked for a few seconds, then set the phone down, not answering. The kitchen returned to silence. Back at the office, Claire opened a drawer and took out the old layoff list. She flipped to the familiar line and stopped. Outside the glass, the city shifted into gray afternoon light. Claire stood there, her hand resting on the papers, understanding that some truths, once exposed, could never return to their previous place. Her phone vibrated. Claire looked at the screen, then silenced it. She returned to her desk and sat down. Opened her laptop. On the screen, the HR system appeared. The name, Marcus Gray, was still marked as no longer with the company. Claire stared at that line for a long time. The call came in the late afternoon, just as Marcus finished cleaning the kitchen and was about to leave for the night shift. His phone vibrated on the table, an unfamiliar number on the screen. He looked at it for a few seconds, then answered, without speaking first. Marcus, Claire's voice came through, direct. I need to see you. They met in a small conference room on a lower floor, not one of the familiar glass rooms used by leadership. The room had no windows, white lights, a plain wooden table, and 4 chairs. Claire arrived first. No assistant, no laptop, only a thin folder placed in front of her. Marcus walked in, his jacket still on, the smell of the warehouse lingering on his sleeves. Claire did not exchange pleasantries. She went straight to the point. "You're coming back. New salary. Insurance, effective immediately." The sentence was placed on the table like a completed option, without a long explanation. Marcus did not react right away. He pulled out a chair and sat down, placing both hands on the table. His eyes passed over the folder, then stopped on Claire's face. "No, favor, right?" he asked. His tone was calm, not confrontational, not grateful. Claire gave a small nod. "No, this is a debt." She said it without emphasis, without softening the word. Marcus looked at her for a few more seconds, as if weighing whether that answer carried enough weight to be trusted. Claire opened the folder and slid it toward Marcus. "A new contract, clear terms, effective immediately. Health insurance reinstated from the signing date. No flowery language. No promises about culture or system change. Just a work agreement, cold and necessary." Marcus did not pick up the pen right away. He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling. In his mind, the image of Lily sleeping appeared clearly. She lay on her side, arms around her old pillow, breathing evenly. Marcus spoke softly, as if to himself. "I'm not coming back for the company." Claire nodded. "I know." She did not try to persuade him further. She did not say things would be different. They sat in silence for a few seconds, letting the space exist as it was. Outside the conference room, footsteps sounded in the hallway. The door opened. Ethan passed by, not intending to look inside, but his eyes met Marcus's. He froze for a beat, then turned fully. Ethan looked different, shoulders slumped, tie removed, face worn. "Marcus, he stumbled, searching for words. "I'm sorry." Marcus looked at Ethan, but did not stand. He replied, his voice low and even. "You're sorry because you got caught." The sentence was not loud, not cruel, but enough to stop Ethan from saying anything else. Ethan nodded, turned away, and continued down the hallway, his back shrinking with each step. Claire watched the exchange in silence. She did not intervene. She understood that some apologies, when they arrive too late, no longer mend anything. They only confirm a truth. Marcus turned back to the contract. He picked up the pen, but his hand paused for a beat above the signature line. A very brief pause, but a clear one. He knew he was stepping back into a smoothly running machine, where collective memory was shorter than any log file. The system would register his name as a new employee, not as someone who had once been removed. He signed. Claire gathered the folder and stood up. "HR will handle the rest," she said. Marcus nodded. The meeting ended cleanly. No handshake, no congratulations. They left the room in opposite directions. That evening, Marcus came home earlier than usual. Lily was already asleep. He stood at her bedroom door, watching for a long moment. On the kitchen table, the hospital bill envelope had been opened, part of it already paid. Marcus set his phone down and sat in the chair, letting the quiet settle around him. The first day back at the office passed like any normal day. A new badge was issued, a different color than before. Marcus sat back at his old desk, the screen lighting up. A new password entered. A coworker passed by and smiled lightly. "That was a long vacation." Marcus did not answer. He opened the system and began reading code, as if he had never left. In the short morning meeting, the new manager talked about progress, optimization, and flexibility. The word came up many times. Marcus listened, did not take notes. He understood this language well. It carried no malice and no memory. At midday, Marcus received a message from Lily. "I don't have a fever today." He read it, the corners of his eyes stinging slightly. He did not reply right away, only stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked the phone. As afternoon fell, Claire stood at the end of the hallway, looking through the glass into the work area. She saw Marcus sitting there, back straight, hands typing steadily. No one paid special attention. Everything ran exactly the way the system always ran. Claire turned away, did not intervene. Before leaving the office, Marcus checked his schedule again. A line appeared at the end of the day, "On call." His hand paused for a beat on the mouse. He knew he had come back, and he also knew that coming back did not mean erasing what had happened. The morning Marcus returned to the office felt light enough to make him uneasy. There was no sense of coming back, no pause of recognition. Everything opened smoothly, like a piece of code that had never been interrupted. The revolving door kept turning. The reception desk stayed lit. The badge scanner made a short, familiar sound when Marcus held up his new badge. The door opened, and the familiar rhythm swallowed him. Marcus stepped into the work area. White light spread evenly across the rows of desks. Screens were already on. His chair was still in the same old position, pushed in just right. He set his backpack down and sat. The screen woke as soon as he touched the keyboard, as if it had never shut off. The system asked for a new password. He entered it. Login was successful. No warning, no questions. Everything accepted him in the coldest, most efficient way possible. A coworker walked past, paused for half a beat, glanced over. That was a long vacation. The line was tossed out lightly, with the familiar joking tone. Marcus looked up and gave a very slight nod. He did not answer, not out of irritation, but because he did not know what to say to a sentence born from missing data. Marcus opened the project and scanned the main modules. The code ran smoothly. The patches from that night had been cleanly merged, refactored to match team standards. Personal traces were blurred out, not by deliberate erasure, but by the system's shared habits. Everything was clean, neat, ready for anyone else to pick up and continue. The manager stopped by, stood behind Marcus for a few seconds, looking at the screen. "Good architecture," he said, objectively, then walked away. He did not look at Marcus while speaking. The compliment hung in the air, not needing a recipient. Marcus watched the man's back, then turned back to the screen. He understood that in this system, architecture was an abstract entity, not attached to any specific person. The short morning meeting started on time. Slides opened, charts stayed stable, and progress was reported briefly. Another manager talked about upcoming plans, emphasizing a familiar word: flexible. Marcus heard it, his jaw tightening for a very small moment. He did not look up. He knew the word was used as an operating criterion, not a personal judgment, but his body still reacted before reason had time to catch up. When the meeting ended, people dispersed quickly. No one stopped to ask where Marcus had been. No one mentioned the night the system almost collapsed. No one talked about delivery shifts, sleepless nights, or calls taken inside a warehouse. Those things did not exist in the shared memory. The system recorded the present state, not the past, unless required. Marcus looked down at the new badge hanging on his chest. Bright plastic, crisp lettering. His name was clean, unscarred. He flipped the badge over, looked at the back, then let it drop. On his body were small cuts, not yet healed. Accumulated exhaustion no one could see. The two existed side by side, never intersecting. At midday, his phone vibrated lightly. A message from Lily appeared. "I don't have a fever today." Marcus read it, his eyes stinging for a moment. He took a slow breath and placed the phone face down on the desk. He did not reply right away. He let the words sit there, like something that needed to remain unchanged. The afternoon passed with familiar tasks. Marcus handled each one, no faster, no slower than before. The clock moved steadily. Coffee went cold on the desk. The sound of keyboards around him formed a steady background rhythm. Here, productivity was the only visible measure. At the end of the hallway, behind the glass, Claire stood watching. She did not step inside. She looked at Marcus from a distance, saw him blend into the shared rhythm, not standing out, not pushed aside. She knew intervening now would create an unnecessary exception. The system worked best when everything looked normal. Claire turned away, leaving the scene behind. An internal email appeared near the end of the day, announcing a resource reallocation. Ethan's name was no longer listed as a project manager. No explanation, no detailed reason. Marcus skimmed it, then deleted it. He did not feel relieved. He did not feel satisfied. None of that changed what had already happened. Before leaving the office, Marcus opened his work calendar. A small entry appeared over the weekend. On call. He stared at the words longer than necessary. His hand paused on the mouse. He remembered standing in the warehouse, phone pressed to his ear, hands slick with oil. He remembered the kitchen light at 3 in the morning. He knew that if the phone rang, his reflex would be the same. Marcus stood, put on his jacket, and left his desk. No one noticed. No one saw him off. He walked through the work area, through the revolving door, and outside. It was already dark. City lights reflected on the glass, breaking into uneven patches of light and shadow. At home, Marcus opened the door quietly. Lily was sitting on the sofa, halfway through a drawing. She looked up and smiled. "Dad's home." Marcus nodded, and set his bag down. He looked at the drawing, two figures standing side by side, hands touching, no extra detail. He sat beside Lily for a few minutes, saying nothing. When Lily went to bed, Marcus returned to the kitchen. The pot with the bent handle sat on the stove, clean. He touched the handle, feeling the cold metal. His phone vibrated softly. An email from the company, a reminder about the weekend on call. Marcus looked at the screen, then turned it off. He sat down, his back against the table. In his mind, a question surfaced, not needing to be spoken. Next time, if he has to choose, will he still help? The evening unfolded in a familiar rhythm, steady enough not to cause worry, yet slow enough to give every thought time to return. Marcus stood in the kitchen, a wooden ladle in hand, stirring a pot of porridge on the small stove. Steam rose, fogging one corner of the window. The pot was still the old one, its bottom darkened, its handle bent to one side as if warped long ago. Marcus had thought about replacing it, but every time he was about to buy a new one, he stopped. It still worked, and some things, as long as they still work, never quite give you a reason to throw them away. Lily sat on the chair, legs swinging, arms wrapped around a worn, stuffed bear. She watched Marcus for a moment, then asked very softly, as if afraid to break the quiet, "Are you sad, Dad?" The question came unexpectedly, without build-up, without any special expression. Marcus paused his stirring for a brief beat, then continued, "I'm still thinking," he said, not to avoid the question and not to reassure her. It was simply the most honest answer he had. Lily nodded, accepting the answer the way she accepted many other things in their shared life. Marcus ladled the porridge into a bowl, let it cool a little, and placed it in front of her. Lily ate slowly, spoonful by spoonful. Marcus sat across from her, watching her eat, saying nothing more. This quiet was not healing. It simply existed, like part of a life that had been rearranged at the most basic level. The television was on in the living room, its sound steady. The news talked about new signs of recession, forecast numbers, and words that had appeared before. Marcus stood, walked into the living room, picked up the remote, and muted it. The images kept moving, but without sound. He did not need to hear it. Those downward curves were no longer abstract concepts to him. After Lily finished eating, Marcus cleared the bowl and washed the pot. He placed the pot back in its usual spot on the stove. His hand touched the handle, feeling its familiar bend. A small dent, not enough to affect cooking, but enough to always be seen. Marcus stood there for a few more seconds, then turned away. Lily went into the bedroom, climbed onto the bed, and pulled up the blanket. "Remember to turn off the light," she said. Marcus nodded. He stood at the doorway, watching Lily close her eyes, her breathing slowly evening out. When he was sure she was asleep, he closed the door and returned to the kitchen. On the table, the laptop was already open. Marcus sat down and opened his work calendar. Time blocks lined up neatly. At the weekend, a small line of text appeared. On call. Marcus looked at it longer than usual. His hand rested on the mouse. He knew what it meant. It was not a threat, and not an unusual request. It was simply part of how the system operated. But for him, every time he saw it, his body reacted before his mind had time to intervene. His phone vibrated lightly. A new email. The sender was Claire. The message was short, with no long subject. "If you need time." Marcus read it and did not reply. He did not know how to reply correctly. Time was something he had learned to manage on his own, and that offer, even if it came from good intent, did not change the structure he was standing inside. Elsewhere in the city, Ethan was clearing out his office. A small cardboard box, a few notebooks, and a framed photo he had not yet placed on a new desk. No one lingered to talk for long. No one asked where he would go next. Polite nods happened quickly, then ended. When Ethan stepped into the elevator, the hallway returned to its normal rhythm, as if nothing had changed. Marcus did not know about that clearing out, and even if he had, he was not sure what he would have felt. Part of him understood that one person leaving did not slow the system down. It only meant the space would be filled by another name. The night deepened. Marcus closed the laptop, not because he was tired, but because there was nothing left to do. He sat in the dark kitchen, with only a small light on. The room was quiet, broken only by Lily's steady breathing from the next room. Marcus leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a few seconds. In the darkness behind his eyelids, scattered images appeared. The warehouse, the log screen, The meeting room, the apartment hallway, the bent-handled pot. He opened his eyes and looked around the kitchen. Everything here was familiar, almost to the point of invisibility. Marcus thought about work tomorrow, about lines of code not yet written, about the on-call schedule. He also thought about choices already made, not to regret them, but to remember. Some decisions, once made, do not create victories, they only leave marks. Marcus stood up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to the bedroom. Before closing his door, he looked back at the kitchen one more time. The pot rested quietly on the stove. The hospital bill envelope had been put away. Nothing looked clearly different, only that everything had been placed back into the positions the system allowed. Marcus lay down on the bed, facing the window. Outside, the city was still lit. Distant traffic sounds, lights that did not go out. He did not think about leaving. He did not think about staying long-term either. Those ideas had lost their clear meaning. In that quiet, an old sentence returned, without sound, without needing to be spoken. The system does not remember, but people do. And there are times when helping leaves a scratch that never heals. Marcus's story is not a story about a hero or a kind CEO appearing at the right moment. It is a story about how a system operates when placed under pressure, and who is forced to pay the price first. When everything is reduced to spreadsheets, things that cannot be measured, such as family circumstances, human endurance, or physical limits, are the first to be removed. The system is not evil, but it also has no conscience. From Marcus's personal story, we see a larger lesson. In any organization, the people who keep the system running most smoothly are often the easiest to replace on paper, and sometimes they are the ones who bear the heaviest consequences when everything collapses. The flexibility that systems demand is often built on the silent sacrifices of very real people. The remaining question is not only for Marcus, but for all of us. When faced with a difficult decision, what will you choose, and how much are you willing to accept the consequences? If this story made you think, please share it so others can learn from it as well. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to continue accompanying us in stories that are deep, honest, and meaningful.